I'm Damian Bassage. Welcome to California Frontier. You know, I knew that traditionally churches are built or have been built on an east-west axis, right? Because you would be facing the east where Christ would be coming, at the end of time, would be returning. It's really interesting, though, to hear that, for example, in the case of San Juan Bautista, not only was that happening, but it was oriented toward this cleft in the hills that the sun
Yes.
was rising through. What you're implying, or what you're suggesting, is that there was sort of an understanding with the indigenous people there that these are certain spots that are significant for us, and that would be important to highlight them in a ritual way. Does that make sense? Am I on the right track?
Yes. No, you're on the right track, and that is a part of the tack that I take, because I see no point in being divisive about these issues. These are discoveries. These are part of the human tradition. They are part of the science, technology, and medicines, and the sophistication of our ancestors, indigenous and otherwise. And to assert or to claim it's like European colonists claiming one continent over another, disregarding the existing inhabitants. So that's what's happening. People want to claim it for their tradition and use it to despise the other tradition. I don't buy into that. Again, I don't take sides when it comes to my ancestors. They both contributed. The friars clearly had an objective to acknowledge the coming of the Christ through the light of the Christ. In Mexico, the in the Sierra de Puebla, the Nahua speakers of the eastern contingent of the Nahua tradition, they continue to do a midsummer solstice pilgrimage to the top of a hill. And they do sacrifices of animals, flowers, and other things all the way up to the top. And they say that the light of the Christ is at the summit. So they're doing it under the guise of Catholicism. And it's appropriate to the church and its founders. So they do this ceremony, but as a midsummer solstice, they get to the top, and what's there? A massive cross painted white, which for them represents the illumination of the sun. And they see Christ as the Cristo Helios, the solar Christ. And that's part of a very ancient tradition in the Americas. So much so that the sunburst monstrance that we know of, this was a device that holds the Eucharist, the host, and it typically was circular. It would have a crystal, and then the Eucharist would be placed and would be used for processions or for the altars. Well, in the Americas, the church modified this to include the sunburst. So the church was actively engaged in conflating a Jesus with the sun, and thereby reconciling indigenous traditions of solar worship with that of Christ and literally making them one and the same. So the Cristo Helios is very much a part of the Spanish colonial and indigenous traditions of the Americas. So when we look at these churches, San Juan has a multitude of elements that make it even more significant as an archetype of the heavenly kingdom, the New Jerusalem, and all of these other things that the friars were very much invested in. In fact, if I were to take kind of a stripped down version of the church at San Juan, think of it this way: you come to the face of the church, and it's a massive whitewashed facade, which is devoid and sterile in terms of iconography, and it has three arches as you're approaching. The three arches from Roman antiquity represent the propylaeum, the gateway to heaven or the kingdom. So you're approaching the kingdom, but on the exterior, what you have is something that alludes back to the Middle East and the traditions of how the world was seen as a place of that was devoid of a spiritual dimension. So the facade of the church is devoid of anything that speaks to that which is sacred. But you pass through the gateway of the propylaeum, you enter the church, and suddenly you're confronted by a spectacle, a theater of conversion, a theater of light, in which you see vines, you see flowers, You see all these very elaborate elements. You see the saints. And in the case of San Juan, you have three aisles. So, again, the Trinity. And then you have 12 archways. Again, you're looking at the gateways to the heavenly kingdom, as well as the number 12 reflecting the apostles and many other dimensions. And then when you take it all into account, as you pass towards the altar, you're passing by each one of 14 stations of the cross, which was literally the pathway of the Christ during the crucifixion. You get to the altar and you have eight portals or nichos with various saints, and each of those saints relate to agriculture, they relate to the sun, the founders of the church, and so forth, including the Santo Nino. So all of the iconography, and if you look at the altar at San Juan, it has these green columns. There's a total of 12 of them. If you go back to the Solomonic columns of the great temple, the heavenly kingdom,
in Jerusalem.
King Solomon's temple, you have the 12 columns, you have the 12 portals, and ultimately the indication for me, if you include the blue doors to the exterior of the church, you have literally the river of life, which is alluded to in the book of Revelation as representing the roaring and the ushering in of the waters that bring the Christ. And so when you look at it as this dynamic, animated being, because many indigenous communities saw buildings like those of the ancestral Pueblo as living beings that needed to be fed. And so for me, through my indigenous understandings and background, I see these temples, even though some might see this as heresy, as embodiments of the spiritual and cosmological dimensions of the church. And if you think about it, when I sit in that church, I don't see this sterile building. I'm literally surrounded by the book of Revelation, by the heavenly kingdom, all of the various dimensions that you see in Jerusalem are literally embodied in that building. And then, to top it off, the building is oriented to the east, and on the midwinter solstice, the day most dreaded by the indigenous communities of the Mutsun and other Ohlone communities, you have the sun break through the saddle and send the light of the Christ into the church. And within about 20-minute span, it literally centers on the tabernacle, and the light of Christ literally illuminates the body and blood of Christ. What's interesting about all this is that having observed the illumination on the midwinter solstice, there was one year where the Los Angeles Times was tracking my work, and they wanted, where's the next illumination? Can you be at Carmel when that illumination happens on the midsummer solstice? And I, which would have been June 21st. And I said, I'm going to be out of state that time, but the next one would be San Jose. And then the one after that is Mission San Juan Bautista. So the reporter showed up at the San Juan Bautista illumination on December 21st, and the church was packed with people. And he was busy taking photos, taking notes, interviewing people. And I was asked to explain what the community was about to see. I did a brief presentation, but one woman that was in the audience walked up to me and she says, "Why does the sun hit those boards with no iconography? Why does it hit that? There's nothing there." And then it dawned on me, Father Ed's got the wrong date. So I thought, wow, all of this is built up around the midwinter solstice. So I thought about it, and I did a calculation using tables that I developed on the trajectory of the sun. And I realized that the illumination that would first strike one of the saints, mainly Saint Francis, who was originally situated in the lower left, that would happen on Feast of the Immaculate Conception on December 12th, or December 8th, excuse me. And then I projected from that forward into January, and it turned out that the illumination would return on January 6th, which is Epiphany, which is the date traditionally ascribed in Latin America to Christmas. And so I waited until December 6th. I went into the church with a high-end camera and several other still cameras. And as I was preparing and narrating what was about to happen, suddenly the light begins to pulsate through the window and it illuminates St. Isidore, who now stands where the original St. Francis once stood. And it framed it perfectly. I managed to get a lot of photos of that. And then the light dropped and it illuminated the tabernacle. And through the course of the day at noon, the clerestory windows began illuminating St. John the Baptist at precisely noon. And then through the course of the next hour and a half, the side altar, which is on the far east end of the church, which once held the nativity, a beam of light comes in and illuminates that nativity scene, which is now dominated by the Santo Niño de Atocha. And then I watched and documented as various clerestory windows illuminated the Stations of the Cross on the east half of the church. So for me, it was it was a miraculous apparition of the faith.